In today's video, we're going to be covering solar charge controllers, and we're going to do like an ultimate buyer's guide. I'm going to tell you guys how these differ, and we're going to do a real world test comparison with two identical solar panels with a lithium iron phosphate battery. And I tried to get a manufacturer to sponsor this video, but they said they do not like my comparison videos at all. They said that if I review like this MPPT, I have to have only this one in the video. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I want to see how it compares to the other ones. So I had to buy all of these with my own cash through Amazon, and I think some of the results are going to surprise you guys. And so I built this test station, and we can now use it to test any kind of solar power system component that we want. So we have these two wires that go outside to two identical 100 watt monocrystalline solar panels, and they have the same gauge and strand count of copper, and they go to solar input 1 and solar input number 2. So these watt meters tell us how much power is going into the solar charge controller. Then we have two wires that go out to these two watt meters, and we have controller output number 1 and controller output number 2. And then these connect to the battery, the lithium iron phosphate 12 volt battery. And then we have a watt meter at the battery and also another amp meter to verify results. And then this watt meter is to show us how much power it uses at nighttime during standby to see if there's a big difference there. So I'm able to test various solar charge controllers. And I tried to buy a variety of charge controllers so this could be an interesting comparison. So first we have rebranded ones, and these are identical, but they actually have some subtle differences I found out. And then we have an expensive and a cheap pulse width modulation controller. We have an expensive MPPT and a cheap one. We have my favorite one that I'm super biased to, and this, it's not sponsored at all, but this is an amazing solar charge controller. And then we have these new ones. This one has like a screen, and you can pop this out and put different modules inside. And then we have the super popular Tracer one by Ever, and this one's pretty good too. So before we test these controllers, I want to give a general overview of what to look for and what features and quality of materials that you need in a solar charge controller. And so we have these two solar charge controllers that are rebranded, and a lot of distributors for solar power system components simply put their own label on there, or they'll change the color scheme, like this one's orange and this one's blue. But with the Renogy, you will notice that at the bottom, the input terminals are very tiny, weak, and flimsy, and in some of the reviews, you'll find that these can break, and you can also strip out the screws when you're tightening them down. And because this is 20 amp, you can get by with a 10 or 12 gauge wire, and it will barely fit it. But because I want minimal losses between the controller and the battery, and for safety reasons, I want to over gauge these wires. And so that is one of the features I like to look for. If you compare it to Rich Solar, even though it's the exact same MPPT, it has different input terminals, and these are very thick and strong, and you can put a very large wire in there. Even though this is a 20 amp, I could fit like a 6 gauge wire in there. So that is a huge benefit. You always want to check the input terminals. And even compare it to a Victron. This is a lot more expensive than the Rich Solar MPPT, but it has just these circuit board mounted, cheap, weak, flimsy ones. And these work all right, but they're so small compared to the Rich Solar. And to these other ones, this is a 20 amp one as well, and it has bigger, way bigger than the Victron. And that's where the Victron really fails, is the input terminals. And that's one of the most common problems I see people have with solar charge controllers, is they do not use thick enough gauge wires between the charge controller and the battery, or it breaks at the circuit board. And when that happens, this can burn out and it can actually overheat and cause a fire. So it's very important to have strong input terminals such as the Rich Solar or the Evers. But if you look at Victron or Renogy, they have these tiny dinky ones, and also the $15 ones. You know what's funny is, yeah, these are the same size. The $15 controller and the $150 Victron have the same size input terminals. It's just cheap. They need to use something strong like these Evers use. And the charge controller with the best input terminals are these. These are huge and super solid, and I can use this screwdriver and crank it down. Like, these are the best ones on the market that I've ever found. The next thing that we need to talk about is if it has temperature compensation. If you're using a lead acid battery, you need to have it. This one is really cheap and it doesn't have it. And if your batteries are really hot and it tries to charge at full rate and you have a small battery, you can hurt your battery. And so you need to have temperature compensation. Usually you'll see temp sensor, temp right here. All of these have it, but the super cheap ones do not have it. Now we're going to talk about the quality of materials that they use. Most of these are made with cheap, hollow plastic. And this one feels like a McDonald's kids toy. And I have a friend that works at a distributor for solar power system components. And he said that he buys these from China for $3. And then they sell them on Amazon for like $15 to $20. And you can tell by what kind of plastic they use. It's very cheap. I mean, this one has cheap, shiny plastic, and it looks like a kid's toy. Like, I do not like this. This will not affect performance that much, but you can tell how much money they're actually putting into these things. Now compare all of these plastic ones to the Victron. This one is high quality nylon, and it does not feel like a kid's toy. It looks really good. It's strong, solid stuff. Now compare all of these to my favorite one, where it's die cast aluminum. The whole thing is pure metal, and it can dissipate heat really nicely. They put a lot more money into this one, and there's not as much empty space in it. So like inside of this one, if you tear this apart, there's a lot of empty air space inside. On this one, all of it's being utilized as a heat sink. So this is most ideal circumstance for a case material. The next thing to look for is if it has a readout screen so that you can see how much power is going through your charge controller, if you can change the charge profile parameters, if you can do data logging, see the temperature of the battery, all of that good stuff. And most of these actually have its own screen. Even the cheap $15 one has its own screen. The one that doesn't have its own screen and doesn't even have an option for finding out how much power is going through it is this one, the Renogy. But this one's a very bare bones, super cheap one, so I understand why. The ones that don't have the screens though, like the Victron Energy and this one, you connect your own screen or you connect it to Bluetooth to your phone. So with the Victron Energy, you connect it to your phone with Bluetooth, and it shows you data logging for the last month, every day, how much power is going through it. You can change the charge profile parameters. You can see the temperature of things. It's really nice. This one has the best interface of them all. It's great. But for this one, and for the EP Evers, you can use the MT50 screen. And I like not having a screen on the solar charge controller itself because it can use more power. And who is going to have their solar charge controller in a accessible place near your living area? For most solar power systems, the batteries and all this other stuff is going to be in a battery compartment or far away from your living area. So what I like to do is I like to have no screen on it, like this one, and then I run a wire to the MT50 screen, and then I put this in the living area. And so that's really important. You can also, though, connect it to this one, but then you'll have two screens, which is fine. Or you can connect it to this one right here with the COM port. But I really like having a remote display. The Bluetooth is ideal, but I wonder how much power it uses throughout the day because it's always on. I'm not sure if there's an option to turn it off. But yeah, it's really nice and convenient. But this costs more money to have the Bluetooth connection. These Victrons are not cheap. So what I personally like is this one again. I love this thing. It has all the features I need. I've tried all of them. And then you have this for remote viewing in your living area. So this is really good. And you can change everything. You can use this with a Tesla battery. You can use it with any battery you want. But it's harder to program than the Victron. If you're using a custom lithium battery bank, the Victron is the best one. I just hate all these other things about it and the heat sink. I mean, this thing gets hot compared to this thing. But also understand that a lot of system monitoring you don't really need. If you have a well-designed system and it produces the power that you need, you shouldn't have to check the screen at all. I like having the screen to see system stats for the first month of using the system. But after that, I don't want to look at that screen all the time. I want a solar power system that powers my stuff without even thinking about it. So if you're having to check the screen all the time, maybe you should redesign your system or add more solar panels or build a bigger battery bank. Which leads us to how easy it is to program these, and that's the next feature that we want to talk about. So even though these have screens, some of them are a lot harder to program than others, but it really depends on how much you need to program. If you're building a do-it-yourself prismatic cell lithium iron phosphate battery, you're going to have to go with either a Victron or an EP Ever that has an MT50 screen. You cannot use any of these because these, you can change it to like a lithium iron phosphate drop-in lead acid replacement, which goes to 14.4 volts. But if you want to set the upper voltage limit, like a custom profile, you just can't do it. You're supposed to be able to connect it to your computer, but I've always failed, and every single person that has had this has complained. Same with the Renogy. These are the same things. The interface is the same, and I can never get these to program properly. I can get the EP-Ever to program with my computer, but it's a pain in the butt, and I do not recommend anybody even trying that. Even attempting it is a waste of time. If you're using the EP-Evers, you have to use the MT50 screen to program it. But if you have a custom battery and you don't want to have any difficulties, the Victron is going to be the best. You connect it to your phone and you tell exactly which numbers to do, and it's done and set. This one you can change the float voltage, but I don't think you can change anything else. And this one though, these are really good if you have standard lead acid batteries. Because if you just want to connect up your system and not check it that much, this works really well. And this is very easy to program for standard battery sizes. And all of these are very easy to program for standard ones. But like I said, if you're doing a custom battery, Victron or EP-Ever with MT50. This one right here has one button, and it says green light means sealed, orange is gel, and red is flooded. And you like tap it or you hold it down, and then this one changes to that color. And so if you have a standard battery that's not lithium, this works really well. But this is very bare bones. If you want to change the upper voltage limit and change your charge cycle life over time, this is not what you want. You're going to have one of these other ones. For most people using sealed lead acid, all of these will work. You just connect it and you don't have to worry about it. So a lot of you guys, that might not even apply to you at all. Something that confuses people that we need to talk about is they think that if you have two separate solar charge controllers attached to a single battery, that they'll fight each other and it will reduce the output of one of the charge controllers. But you can clearly see here 48 watts going into the battery from one controller, 48 watts going in from another controller. So there's no fighting going on if you have two solar charge controllers. That just does not happen. It's not how these things work. Today's a super sunny day, so we're going to test the output of these charge controllers with these two panels that are exactly the same. They are the same temperature, they are tilted the same, and then we have these two wires that go under here all the way up to the window of the RV to our test station. And so for our first test, we have a cheap PWM and a more expensive one. And at the battery, we have 69 watts going in and 69 watts going in. So these two controllers have the same output. And in all honesty, even though this one has the screen, I would prefer this one just because it's nicer to look at and it has the temperature sensor. So this one wins my pulse width modulation controller test. For the next test, we have rebranded Rich Solar and Renogy MPPT. And over here we have 71 watts for the Renogy, we have 71 watts for the Rich. So they're the same. But this one has better input terminals. If you were choosing between these two, I would get the Rich Solar one. Now for this comparison, we have EP-Ever Tracer, which is super popular, and then this Rich Solar is probably the cheapest MPPT that we have. And right here we have 72 watts and 72 watts. So they're practically the same. And now we have two EP-Evers. This one's a 20 amp and this is a 30 amp. We've got 73 watts and 73 watts. So again, they're all the same. So now it's time to make this test a little interesting. We have our most expensive MPPT and our cheapest MPPT. And right now we've got 72 watts right here and 72 watts right here. So whether you buy the Victron or you buy this like $70 or $80 one, they still produce the same amount of power. And after doing this test several times on my own, I've noticed that the difference between these is not the power output, but it's the tracking speed, or how fast it takes for this to find the power point. This one takes about 20 seconds, and it's producing power the moment I plug panels in. This one, it takes 30 seconds to a minute to find the power point. So this one's a bit faster. Also, this one is just as fast as this EP-Ever one. This is also my fastest tracking one. But I've noticed that when I test it over time, like the kilowatt hour throughout a day, the fast tracking doesn't change much. If you have a bunch of trees shading it constantly, this one might give you a couple more watt hours, but it's not that big of a difference. But it is a difference, so I just had to mention that. Now we're going to do an interesting test with a 40 amp MPPT and a 20 amp MPPT. And because if you look at the data sheets, the efficiency curve will be slightly different depending on which size of controller you have. So there might be a difference here. So we've got 73, 72.8, 73, 72.8. Down here we have 72.5, 72.7. So it's like a 1% difference. But this produces more power, but it's because this is a 40 amp versus a 20 amp. This is also dependent on the size of the solar panel attached to it. And if you look at the data sheet, you can see the efficiency curve. But like I said, it's only a difference of like 1% up to 3%. But it is a real thing that you can measure, so it's interesting to see. The next part of our test, we have some more sunshine, but it's pretty cloudy, and we're going to compare the output of PWM and MPPT. We have an MPPT and a pulse width modulation controller, and what's going to the battery from the PWM is 69 watts, and what's going to the battery from the MPPT is 71 watts. So that's really good considering the price of this pulse width modulation, and it actually does really well. It's really surprising. And to test if our results are consistent, I switched the two solar panel wires that are coming in case there's a difference. And down here we got 71 watts, up here we have 69 watts, so consistent results. And now we have the Renogy MPPT versus the PWM by Renogy. And in full sunshine, we're getting 77 watts with MPPT and 72 to 73 watts with the pulse width modulation controller. So that's actually still pretty good. I'm pretty impressed by it. I'm starting to think that the biggest advantage of MPPT is that you can series connect your panels. But I just thought about a workaround. So what you could do is get a 24 volt PWM and then series connect 12 volt panels to make a 24 volt panel, and then input it and then use a 24 volt battery. So that means you can series connect a little bit and still use a PWM and save a lot of money. So I think I'm going to design a system for that, because that would be really cheap and really powerful. The sun is going down and we've got 10 watts from the MPPT and 8.8 from the PWM. It's destroying it today. It's amazing. So for our final PWM versus MPPT test, we're going to see how much this one produces over this one. So up here we've got 70 watts. We've got 72 watts. That's incredible, even compared to the Victron. I mean, this is $15 and this is $150. You can buy a whole other solar panel. And one of my viewers actually told me this in a previous video, and I didn't really believe him because I thought of all the other benefits of MPPT. But look at these numbers. Look at 70, 72 watts. The PWM is doing great for its price. But like I said, this doesn't have temp sensor, so if you have lead acid, I would not use this. But man, if you are on a budget, this is incredible. So after all of those tests, what did we learn? We learned that pulse width modulation is pretty amazing, but I must stress that you cannot series connect with any of these pulse width modulation controllers. If you do, the output will be reduced by like 50%. So if you use this, you need to parallel connect and spend more money on wire. For my most recent array, if I were to use a PWM versus an MPPT, instead of spending $100, I'd have to spend $400 on the wire connecting my solar panel array. So if you're going to use these, make sure that you use branch connectors and you parallel connect, and you understand that the solar panels need to be close to the controller. If not, you don't want to use these. But for a lot of people on a budget, in a van or an RV, this is actually a great option, and I stand corrected. I actually said in a previous video, and some guy disagreed with me, and he's right. He did make a good point. And if you're on a budget, these super cheap MPPTs produce the same amount of power as this Victron. And a lot of people will say, oh, the Victron has Bluetooth, it has multi-point tracking, but under most circumstances, you guys will probably not notice that, and you probably don't need to check it every 10 minutes. So if you're on a budget for MPPT, this is great. Actually, the price of this is like $33 to $35, and this one's like $70. So honestly, for the price as an MPPT, this is great for most systems. But if you want the best and cheap, this is the way to go. I love this thing. It's like 200 bucks for a 40 amp MPPT, and it does everything. I've used these for years. I love these things. And then if you want fancy options, or if you want to have like different disconnects at different voltages and a full complex system that's large, you should go with the Victron. But like I said, I don't like the input terminals and it gets really hot. But yeah, it's a good option still. I still like them. I like all of these actually. And I would use this one for like small, tiny, like maybe a bicycle trailer with some solar panels on it. This I would use for like some lady that doesn't need to program it ever in her life. This one I would use if somebody wants to program any battery. And also, if you're trying to make a complex system that you would have to use a Victron for, but you're on a budget, use this one because it has relay outputs. It has all sorts of different modules that you can mess with. So this is a great option too. If you want a cheap EP ever that's cheaper than this one, this is actually a really good buy too. So it really depends on what you want, but I think they're all pretty good. They're really good charge controllers. So yeah, I hope you guys liked this video. There was a lot to talk about. But yeah, I hope you guys learned something. So yeah, this was really fun. Please leave a comment below and let me know if you learned anything. I also have a whole web page dedicated to these solar charge controllers. I will have links below for all of these charge controllers. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.